Hi, this is Father Dennis Ryan, pastor at St. Dominic Parish. And joining me today is Dr. Lynne Knobloch-Fedders. Close?
Very good.
That's very good, thank you. She's clinical psychologist and on the faculty at Marquette University. And you're here at both your request and my invitation to talk about really the mental health. One of the things that's bothered or concerned me about everything with the pandemic, politics and everything else is our mental health, and especially the mental health of our parishioners. And from that came a sort of conversation about talking about that and seeing what we're going to think about and do. I think one of the things that highlighted it for me, Lynn, was that on November 28th in the Journal, they talked about the problem of mental health. And the first thing I wanted to say is, it always seems that mental health gets lip service. It doesn't, they talk about it, but then nobody does anything or nobody helps with that. And I think the purpose of our conversation is to try and get to that second layer, not just have a conversation about, there's a mental health problem or there's a problem with it. But one of the things that sort of frightened me in here was, I think there was two studies. One was a study that I think the CDC did where they saw that there was at least 3 times as much depressive symptoms or complaints that they have received or the doctors have received that are normal. And the other thing that bothered me when they talked about young adults, there was a study in the JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, that did a survey, and they said up to 1/4 of young adults between 18 and 25 had contemplated taking their own life within the last 30 days. And we know the seriousness of suicide by itself, but that to me isn't, talk about an epidemic or pandemic, that's a worse pandemic than the one we're suffering with today. So thank you for volunteering to come and having us talk about it. That's sort of what I wanted to sort of set the table about, that this is a really serious issue out there. I think one of the things that are difficult with the pandemic is that some people are doing well and some are not. It's not like we're all in the same place, which makes it more difficult because people that are doing well almost feel guilty that, well, I'm doing okay, there must be something wrong with me that's going on. But we really like to first talk about adults and what they may be going through. We sort of polled our staff and got questions for you, and we gave you some questions. A lot of the questions came from parents saying, how can I help my child? But it occurred to me as we talked that you can't give what you don't have. So you can't help your child if you're not looking at your own mental health. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about adults, what possibly we could see, what some of the things they may experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right, Father Dennis, that people that are facing the multiple challenges of this pandemic, the stress of fear of getting sick or being isolated from loved ones, or their whole lives have been changed, how could that not take a toll on how you're feeling and how you're doing? So the first thing I wanted to share is that everyone is experiencing some manner of sadness or fear or stress. And just because you're feeling that way doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or that you are struggling. It just means that you're human and that you're reacting to a really challenging, difficult situation.
I know we talked about even the word trauma, that this is not unlike a physical or psychological trauma that is going to, so do you feel that way about this?
Yeah, so a trauma is something that is a major life experience that shapes you and doesn't go away automatically. It leaves a residue of your experience and your outlook, and takes a while to work through. And so that's what I think we're here to discuss, is how, knowing if you are having difficulty, how do you address that with yourself and be gentle and kind, but also focus on getting better.
So what's some of the common symptoms? I mean, I have sensed like a little bit more irritability, a little bit more people jumping at other people more often, things like that. So what do you see as sort of the normal, if I may use that term, or frequent sort of reactions that people will have in these circumstances?
Yeah, some people feel sad, even hopeless sometimes about the future or that things will get better. Um, Other people get angry and stressed and irritable, kind of quick tempered with an edge to them. Sometimes people just say, I can't enjoy the things that I normally like to do, and so nothing is fun or brings me joy anymore. Um, Sometimes people cope by trying to numb their feelings by using drugs or alcohol or food or gambling or social media, right? They get into
Right,
a distraction mode and
right.
they can't emerge from that. And some people just notice that they're sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, or their eating is off. They just are not coping as well, and they kind of know that down deep that they're struggling.
Well, and for many people, this may be the first time that their normal coping mechanisms are not available to them. Family, relationships, things like that. Plus, we've had to look at our relationships on a different level and almost fearing human contact. It's one thing to talk to somebody on Zoom. It's another thing to almost where you're afraid if I get too close to this person or I touch them, oh, I might give them COVID or something like. So that's not a normal sort of reaction or coping that we have. So we've lost some of those mechanisms.
Human beings are designed for love and relationship and intimacy and closeness. And this has challenged us to understand how we can have those human needs but also be safe. And sometimes the fear of being safe trumps the human relationships that we're all called to. And it's hard, I know that it's hard to form relationships or keep up with loved ones over Zoom. But sometimes when we look back, we will say, we are so glad that we spent that time to maintain our relationships, and we emerged on the other side stronger, closer than if we hadn't.
Well, and it's funny, some of the coping mechanisms are actually old school. If I'm writing a letter, sending a card, drawing a picture, I mean, things that people didn't do now because they were always on the phones. With things like that, they're really sort of rediscovering those old methods of communication, which is interesting too. Some of the things I wanted to ask you about is, how do you know when things are getting to be too much for you? How do you know when, boy, this isn't right? You talked a little bit about addictive behaviors. You talked a little bit about, the sadness and things. How, in your mind, when do you worry when you hear certain things from people?
I worry when the pattern is consistent and enduring, and it's really, their feelings are preventing them from doing things and being there for themselves and their loved ones, but it's really impairing. So when you are having trouble getting out of bed, or you are having trouble facing your responsibilities as a parent or as a spouse or employee, when you're miserable and you've been miserable and you can't figure out a way out, and those things, everybody feels miserable at some points, but those should be passing feelings that you can moderate somehow by helping yourself feel better. And if all your attempts to help yourself feel better aren't working, then I would say that would be something to be concerned about and think about.
And I would think listening to your loved ones. I mean, your loved ones know you best. They know when you're not right. But I would imagine that when you see people, you can kind of know that they've lost that joy. We could be in bad circumstances and be very upset and suffering greatly, but we never lost that joy. So let's talk a little bit about faith. Let's talk about how that joy and what that faith means to us. How do you view faith as part of both the reaction to and the seeing and absorbing what's going on around us?
Our faith is what sets us apart. The idea that God broke into our human existence and loves us so much and has prepared a glorious eternal life for us in heaven. So I like to look at with one eye at the difficulties of the world and challenge and pain and suffering, but another eye focused, like that heavenly eye, on, wow, God loves us. There's a heaven waiting for us that's filled with joy and peace beyond what we could even understand. And that God is calling us to come closer to Him and love each other. And that is the primary job for any Christian in any difficult circumstances. And so that's really the role of faith, I think.
And you talked about like having those two eyes. And I'm not a psychologist, but I have found with the eye on earth, when I feel sad, when I've talked to people that are depressed, my always answer is do normal things. Get up, get dressed, go to your normal routine, go outside, experience outside even when it's cold. So I always say when you do normal things, your brain knows that that's reality, and it kind of will eventually reboot you into the world, and that'll make you feel like you're not watching the world but actually participating in it. And I feel that same way about the faith. You should go do normal things. Don't go to church if you can. Do your prayers if you can. Even if they sound dry, they sound empty, they sound like God's not even here. Just do those normal things, and your body will your spiritual body will reboot a little bit.
You should be a psychologist, Dennis. I think you are absolutely right. God takes any tiny bit of effort and rewards that effort. So even though it might be hard to get out of bed, to get up, get dressed, take a shower, go out for a 3-minute walk outside, that will help you engage with the creation that God has given us, and God has given us life. And so that's an absolutely perfect way of suggesting that even if your heart isn't in it, give it a little bit of effort, and God will flow His grace through you, I think.
I think another good thing is stop doing things that bother you. If you're watching, like you said, too much television and all you're hearing is hours of depressing news, turn it off. And I've heard that if they stop watching that for 1 week, they feel better. You just feel better.
We tell people to limit their exposure to news for that very reason, that sometimes the sensational headlines of woe is me, this is horrible, everybody is suffering, it's hard to escape that when you're just bombarded with it the entire time. And so we tell people scan the headlines maybe once a day and then turn it off. Turn off the TV, turn off the internet, really focus on the peace in the moment and what you have before you. And that's probably a good coping strategy.
And I'll just tell you that I don't watch any news at all, because I figure if something important is going to happen, someone's going to tell me. If somebody said, like California fell into the ocean, I'll find out. Okay, thank you for telling me. But something like that. So I don't worry that I'm missing. And so many people get again, it's almost an addiction. I feel it's almost like you have to come. I'm going to miss something. And they do that addiction. And addictive behaviors you mentioned, I think they're very much a problem with something like this, because first of all, you're not being supervised. And again, you said you got extra time on your hands. And secondly, we all tend to fall back into whatever we think will make us happy, but we know it's only God that's going to make us happy, but we keep repeating those behaviors, and then we feel worse afterwards.
Mm-hmm. It's that emptiness that is our reaction to trying to help ourselves feel better, but knowing that it's not really substantial. So if you are spending the night trolling the internet and just at the end of it feel so discouraged and so empty, pay attention to those feelings, because that means that you've taken yourself in a place that is not healthy for you. And so we like to train people to keep like a mood log, or okay, I went for a walk. How did I feel after that? I spent 3 hours on the internet. How did I feel after that? And you can see patterns in how you're feeling and what you're doing that point you in the direction of healthy things versus unhealthy things.
That sounds like a really good suggestion, because one of the suggestions I often have with people in a spiritual life is to journal, because you can journal your relationship with God, and sometimes you don't notice that there's progress until you go back and say, wow, this is where I was and this is where I am with what I'm doing now to see. So that was really interesting to talk about that possibility. I also feel that when we go and do normal things, both physically and mentally, one of the other things that we should do is take up something creative, do something that does something positive. So if you're in a negative sense, write a card to somebody, write a letter to somebody, do something, give something, look up to give of yourself. And too often every day we constantly are looking at ourselves and what we're doing in the world. And one of the solutions to me is to get out of that and start worrying about somebody else. How can I help? Maybe you have a neighbor that needs groceries. Maybe you need a neighbor that needs lawn care. I mean, things that you never possibly thought of. And maybe your even inner creativity. Can you draw? Can you paint? Can you build? Can you do something? Doing that creativity also is an act of creation that we're drawing on God without even knowing it.
We find that when we work with people, they're tunneling inward. They're just so focused on themselves and how difficult things are, and they can't get out of their own head or their own space. But even when you put your hands like this open instead of clenched, right? It almost just allows the grace and energy to fill you. So we give people the image of open your hands, don't clench them, right? Open your hands to others by caring for someone, calling someone, doing a chore. Even if you can't leave the house, you could say a prayer for someone. You could really wrap someone in kindness, and that would be, I think, one of the biggest mood boosters that you could possibly do.
I think one of the other common things is that people don't appreciate that little things matter. And I remember something about Pope John Paul II, that he spoke 5 languages, and I said, how can you speak 5 languages? And he said, well, I don't speak them very well, but at least I know a little. and many people, they sort of disavow that meant anything. It's just a little thing. I just said a prayer for somebody. What good is that? I'm not getting anywhere. But it's the little things that at least you did something. So at the end of your day, when you said I had 13 hours of badness, well, you had 10 minutes of goodness. And let's look at those 10 minutes and let's make it 15. And let's go on for even the little things of life. And I think, again, I think going back to faith, how important, like St. Teresa of Lisieux, the little flower, little things, a smile. Just smile to people every day and you'll be surprised. Smile to people that you don't like every day. And those little things, and how that's sort of a message of love. And that's sort of the milieu that God wants us in, is those little things. And she was this master of little things.
And that is a great example of this compassionate love that doesn't have to be bounded by your own personal circumstance. That you can find compassionate, loving, prayerful things to give to other people, no matter what your condition, your physical condition, your mental condition. I packed up some artwork that my kids made, and I sent it to my mother-in-law, and she called me and she said, that was the most amazing gift I've received in a long time. And she was crying. And something like that really is you wouldn't normally think. I don't typically send her the kids' artwork, but I just had this feeling like I think this would mean a lot to her. And it did. And it was so simple and easy to do. So I think that those are the kind of things that if you really search hard, you can find a million ways to help.
And their work, but that's I said, it's going back to that work is good work. It may seem laborious, like this was really hard, but it really matters to do those little things. But a lot of people give up because it doesn't seem to matter. I talked to somebody recently they have about 4 kids, and they were lamenting because they won't be with their grandmother. They weren't with their grandmother for Thanksgiving, probably won't be with her for Christmas. So I said, make a little book. Take some pictures, make a little story for them, and send her that book, and she'll just, like your mother was delighted to get that little book. And those things that you wouldn't even think about. That's the creativity that I want. That's another thing that gets lost. I mean, we talked about when you're down, you lose the wonder, you lose your sense of humor. And I always just recently was talking about these three daughters that were following their mother's demise, and one of the things they talked about was the sacrament of humor, and how they were able to laugh about things that normally would be dire. Normally people say, what are you talking about? This is terrible. And you guys are laughing about it. And losing a sense or having a sense of humor is keeping a sense of hope. And if you've lost that sense of humor and that other eye to God, you've lost hope. And if you've lost hope with the Creator, how are you going to have hope in that other eye for things in the world from what you're doing?
And I think that God knows everybody's struggle. And so God is there with you in the darkness, in the fear, and even a small, God, this is beyond me. I can hardly get out of bed today. Help me, please. God will help. I think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, talk about the agony of facing one's own death and the fear. And he was on the ground begging his Father for help. And the most beautiful verse, I think, in the Gospels is in Luke. And an angel came and strengthened him. God will always be there to strengthen us in our moment of need. And you might not feel it right away, but when you look back, you can see that it's there.
Well, and if you continuously, like you said, sort of funnel in on yourself, you're going to miss those angels that are standing next to you. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about, we talked about people that are obviously on the depressive side. There's also kind of that hyper side. There's that type A person that how they're dealing with this is they're nonstop doing stuff. So they're not hearing anything we're saying because they can get out of bed, but they get out of bed, they sleep 4 hours a day, they get out of bed, they run like crazy, they work all day, they work all night, they're like running away almost from things. And that's another type of personality that have to be they're going to burn out. They're going to stop one day and say, what happened? And so some of the things that we had talked about before was being compassionate to yourself, and I think that that's really important for those type A runners, to know that you need to quiet yourself even for a little. Give yourself the space to be quiet and stop. Like we talked about, putting that stop sign in and just actually stopping. Those are the people that just roll through the stop signs on their way to work and do things like that. So what's been your experience with that kind of person?
Well, you can see this pandemic as one big cosmic stopping, right? God is saying, reevaluate all the things that you're doing, all the things that you are focused on. Come to me and see what's really important. So if we don't take advantage of that slowing down, I don't think we'll ever be able to. So I think God is really giving us the opportunity to look deeper and spend some time in reflection. Mm-hmm. And maybe we would never have this opportunity without the pandemic.
We recently had a service for healthcare workers because I was really concerned that they're in that group that they can't stop. They're working 12-hour shifts, they're working extra hours. And I wanted to give them a half an hour to just come and just sit quietly and just listen to God's word. Don't have any expectations, just listen and take that calmness, and hopefully some of them were able to take that home with them and be able to do that. And that's the first thing that I would tell people, and that sort of give some time to God, even if it's 10 minutes, even if it's 15 minutes, some place to God too. Make a place at home or come to church and just sit for a little bit and see. One of the things that I found too is that it's hard. People always, well, how do I start? What do I begin? How do I start this? How do I make that change? How do I slow the boat and change direction?
I think one thing is start small. Give yourself a 5-minute quiet time. And your mind will be racing and it'll be hard, but just keep coming back to a centered place of God or a quiet, and you'll be surprised what you're blessed with in those moments. Maybe some inspiration or a sense of peace or calmness, and that it's hard to do because as humans we're kind of afraid of the emptiness, and yet in the emptiness God can speak volumes. So that would be really, I think, important. And don't feel like you have to change your whole life, right? We start in 3 minutes or 5 minutes and see see what that's like for you.
And I think that exactly actually leads to failure. I've seen a lot of people, okay, I'm going to change this, I'm going to pray, I'm going to do the rosary, and all of a sudden they try to add 3 hours of prayer, and then in a couple of days they burn out on that, and well, it didn't work. And those, again, are those kind of type A personalities that, okay, give me the answer, I want it right now. And just to do something, and like you said, to do something to see what it is. I remember when I was first thinking about meditation, that 5 minutes felt like my mind was going to go crazy, and I almost didn't look forward to just sitting there in God's presence for 5 minutes. I thought, oh my, I'm looking, it's 2, it's 3, and to come back, I was almost fearful. But after about 3 or 4 times, you get that there's something to this. There's something here for what I wanted to do. What's the role of gratitude in mental health?
So we talk about an attitude of gratitude, which means that if you are focused on a woe is me, things are so hard, and they may be hard, but even in the hardness, you can find things that are blessings. The very idea that God has given you life. God has given you a mind, ears to be able to hear our conversation. There's always some blessing that as human beings we tend to just drive right on by, right? We focus so much on the negative that it's hard to see the blessing in the midst of it. And so we encourage people to have a gratitude journal where they write down all the things they're grateful for, and or even share that around the dinner table so you could get your family involved. What are you grateful for that happened today? And you're really training yourself to look at the blessings versus the challenge. So that can be a place for people to start building their capacity to experience joy.
And it's a good place to teach other people that that's important, especially kids. As we talk to young adults and kids, is to say if we're grateful as adults, it says something about our what's important to us. Because I think as we look at kids looking at especially in these circumstances, they look up the adults as, oh boy, they got it all together. They know what they're doing. I have to, if my parents are like my rock from what they're doing, and if the parents be able to say, well, this is how I get to that, it's really gratitude for God and what I've done and what I'm doing. And you said something about it's important. I think we human beings are really funny because we can both suffer and experience joy at the same time. We can both be really sad and ask God, why did this happen? And on the other say, well, God, thank you for the many gifts that you've given me. And we can do that in the same sort of conversation. And that's, I always thought that was so unique to our human condition, is that we can do both.
And the point is to train ourselves to do both. So having a heart that's full of joy in the midst of suffering doesn't happen automatically. Like, we have to work on it. And finding the places of joy, you start small, but you can build your capacity for it. And that's why they say the Christian joy knows no bounds, because you can really thank God for all your blessings, no matter what circumstances, if you have trained yourself to be able to do that, especially in difficult times.
Well, that's what I think in hard things, that what happens is that your gamut of feelings starts to contract. So you almost feel nothing when you get by. Well, I don't feel joy, I don't feel sadness, I feel nothing. And part of your training of gratitude is to pull yourself, now I can feel joy, and now I can actually feel suffering. So you get that, almost re-educate yourself in emotions to see. Well, thank you. We talked about adults and hopefully sharing and helping them be able to look at their own mental health, both from inside and outside, and then be able, again, maybe offer it to their kids or not, which is another issue that we're going to talk about. We want to talk about next some young adults, and it might be things that are specific to young adults, because again, the data supports that those group is really suffering, and we probably don't pay enough attention to them. And then we're going to talk about kids, school-age kids, what they're seeing, what they're going through. So in our next conversations, we'll be talking about those. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.